All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to another episode of The Uneducated and Untrained Pastor. I'm your host, Pastor Ronnie Qualls. I am sitting in the office of West Park Baptist Baptist Church, and I'm here with my good friend, Russell Threet, who, unfortunately, he is not from the uneducated and untrained camp. He has definitely had formal education and formal training. But what I love about Russell is he is, like our buddy and his member of his church, Harold Smith. He's definitely a backwoods Baptist guy. So you can't see it, but over here on this wall, there are degrees everywhere. I'm glad, I'm very honored to have him on here with us today. So, Russell, I'm going to let you just tell about yourself. We've already done this once, and I messed everything up, so we're going to do it again. So, yeah.
Yeah, my name's Russell Threet. I'm the pastor here at West Park Baptist Church in Ozark. I've been here about 3 years, and prior to that, I pastored the First Baptist Church in Mena, Arkansas for 7 years and had some ministry experience before that. Married to my wife, Sarah, and we have 3 sons, William, Paul, Jack, and Luke. I know that sounds like 4, but William Paul's just one guy. So that's my 3 sons, and right now we're in the middle of revival meetings, which is why Brother Ronnie's here. He preached for us the other night and did a great job, and so glad to be on here with you guys.
Yeah. Okay, we was talking a little bit about how we met, and you said, I'm not sure. It was probably at Preachers of Grace. Mm-hmm. I think the first time that I really remember kind of getting to know you a little bit was when we were doing the pastor's lunch, which we just came from that. Mm-hmm. But this was the one where we had it at Lee Creek Baptist Church. Okay. It was the first one that I had ever came to, and we didn't go to what's that pizza place?
Larry's Pizza.
Larry's Pizza. That's some good pizza if you're ever in Van Buren or wherever that is. But they did it at Lee Creek Baptist Church, and I remember we sat down at the table there for a while together, and that's when I first got to know you somewhat. Mm-hmm. And then just through the pastor's lunches and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so earlier this year, I called Russell up, and I invited him to come and asked him if he would want to come and preach at our conference that we had at Bowlegs Baptist Church. And Russell came out, and I had several speakers, but he preached on Saturday before lunch. He got a good spot, man. I mean, kind of a good spot. You don't want to preach too long before lunch.
That's
People
right.
want to go eat. But,
that's right.
But and like he said, now, I was on the B team this year. He had actually Brandon Harrell scheduled to preach, and Brandon had to have surgery, and he couldn't come. And so he called me, and, man, I was very honored and to be able to come out. And, man, they got a great church here and stuff. But well, let's do this, brother. Why don't you tell people kind of how you was raised up and how you became a Christian, or how you was saved, when you was saved and called into ministry and things like that.
Yeah, so I grew up in a home that, we went to church, Southern Baptist background. My grandfather pastored Southern Baptist churches from the time he was 15 years old, almost till the time he died.
Really?
And up in the mountains in Arkansas, when he was 15, he pastored a church. That's the true story. And so we went to church. My dad was a pastor's kid, but we were kind of Sunday morning folks. We went on Sunday morning. We were going to go, but we weren't terribly involved. My sister, as she got older, got really involved. And in the kind of the midst of that, and look, some people are going to have some opinions about this, but this is what happened. It was at an event that I probably wouldn't host at my church. They had this drama back then, and they're still doing it today. It's called Heaven's Gates, Hell's Flames. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of that, but it's they go through these different scenes, and it's a different different things, and they're preaching the gospel, but they're also talking about heaven and hell, and anyways at that event, I really truly believe that that's when I came to Christ and was convicted of sin, and so I as much as a young boy, I was 11 or 12 years old when that happened, and as much as a young boy can, I guess I was trying to live a Christian life, and like a lot of young men, the time I was 15 or 16, I kind of took out after some other things in life that weren't very good. I had a big desire for just a few things. I wanted to play football. I wanted to chase around girls, and I liked alcohol a little too much. And so I had some rough years, but after getting out of school and stuff, I got married, and when I was in my early 20s, and I don't know. Do we have time for me to tell you the story I told you the other night?
We got time,
yeah.
brother.
So it was interesting. We were married. We were living in a different town than where I grew up, and I was working and doing different things, and I just kind of decided I was going to join the Army. I said that's going to be a good career, support my family, that kind of stuff. My wife was pregnant, and so I spent some time. I guess she wasn't pregnant yet. That was later, but I got some time to lose some weight. I lost about 100 pounds in a year. Joined the Army, and while I was there, they found out my blood pressure was higher than they wanted it to be after I'd gone through all the physicals, all that stuff, and I went. Once I got there, my blood pressure was high, and they kind of pulled me out. I never got out of the reception area of the kind of intake when you go to training, and so I was there, and while I was kind of having my blood pressure taken several times a day and they were deciding on my fate, I got put on what's called full unit watch with this young man who had some was really disturbed, I guess, had been suicidal and those kind of things. He was about to go home and probably go to an institution, honestly. And so I had to stay with this guy wherever he went. If he went to the bathroom, I'd just sit there and watch him. I mean, he didn't even have shoelaces in his shoes. And
they afraid he might hang himself.
Yeah, they were afraid he was going to hurt himself, you know. Yeah. And so I had to pay attention to this kid. And he was 17 years old. His parents had signed papers for him to join early. I was in my early 20s, probably in the best shape of my life. And I wasn't scared of nobody, but I was scared of that young man. He was kind of a spooky individual. And we're sitting around all day. We can't train. We can't go to PT. We can't do anything. And so we're just there. We sit around and we go eat. We sit around and we go eat. And that was all that was going on for the few days I was going to be there. Well, they decided I was going home. And so in the midst of, leading up to that, I'd had a Bible that I brought. I hadn't been going to church a lot, but when I was getting ready to go to training, we moved back close to where my family lived because my wife needed some people around her. At that time, she was pregnant, and my son was going to be born. It was going to be hit or miss whether I was going to get back in time. You know, it was going to be close.
Wow.
And so we had moved back, and we had started going back to church some at my home church. But so I brought my Bible with me, and when we left the MEP station, we had those Gideon Testaments given to us, little camouflage ones.
Yeah.
So I was sitting around reading the Bible, not because I was particularly convicted I needed to read my Bible. I didn't have anything else to do. And that's what I was doing. And that kid was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm reading this Bible." And he said, "Hon, I had that Gideon Testament." I said, "Hey, man, you can read this if you want to." Well, in a couple of days, I was getting ready to go home. They were sending me home, and he wasn't leaving yet. And I was gathering up all my stuff, and he came to give me that Gideon Bible back. And I said, "Look, man, I got Bibles. I don't need that thing. Keep it." And I never forget, he kind of held it up. And the thing that was spooky about that kid was his eyes. I don't know if they had him on a bunch of medicine or what, but when I first met him, it was like his eyes were blacked out, and he was just kind of spooky looking. You know, he was just kind of hard to be around. And I remember looking at him, and I remember thinking his eyes were a little different. He wasn't quite, as spooky to me as he once had been.
Was he a big guy?
No, he was pretty tall, but he's a thin kid, 17 years old. And he held that Bible up, and he's like, "Thanks, man. I don't know why, but this kind of helped me." Now, if I'd have had any sense at that point in my life, I'd have tried to share the gospel with him, but I wasn't there. That's not where I was at.
Right.
And so I just kind of registered with me, hey, man, that was interesting. Something about that Bible really did something to him. And so I went on from there and went back home and got a job selling furniture, which I was really good at, and started going back to church, and just in a pretty quick fashion, I was going to Sunday school. I was going Tuesday night to help with visitation, writing cards to absentee church members. Got asked to fill in Sunday school, and then pretty quickly, God just started dealing with my heart. And I was in a Wednesday night service, with all the old folks. Everybody else was working with the kids and the youth. And my wife and I were there. And I told Brother Ron this the other day, I was sitting there, and this is a Wednesday night Bible study. It's not like they're going to have a time of response or anything like that. My pastor was preaching and about doing Bible study, and I just remember sitting there, and I was convinced, whether it was true or whether it wasn't true, God convinced me, if I didn't stand up and tell them folks that I believed I was called to ministry, I believed God was going to kill me. I mean, I really do. Like, again, maybe he wouldn't have, but he sure made a believer out of me in that moment. Yeah. And so the pastor finished the Bible study, had prayer, and he closed in prayer. And when he said amen, I just stood up and said, hey, I got something to say. Now, these people know me all my life, and they knew my family, they knew my grandparents. They my grandfather retired some years before that. He was in that church, and they knew him. They usually would have been there, but my grandmother wasn't feeling well. Matter of fact, she was at the hospital. We were going to go see her after church. And I went up there, and I just told the pastor, who I'm very close to this day, I believe God's calling me to ministry. And the only thing he could say to me was, your grandfather's going to be really mad that he wasn't here. Yeah. And so that was kind of the beginning of my journey. That happened. All that began to happen. I came back from the Army, I believe, in December I guess that would have been 2008, 2009. 2010 is when I started going back to church. And by the following fall, I had gotten online and finished college because I was about 20 hours short of finishing college. And we tore out and we left and went to seminary and started getting into ministry, and it just kind of went from there.
Wow. So how long have you been pastoring to this point?
So I was a youth pastor for a short period of time, about 2 years. I was a pastor at a small church in Virginia for a couple of years. I was at Mena for 7, and I've been here for 3. So somewhere around 14 years, something like that.
Okay.
I was a volunteer youth minister at a church while I was in seminary. So it kind of depends on how you want to do the math on all that, but somewhere around 14, 15 years.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me ask you this, man. I mean, the thing that I really appreciate about you is you have done the homework. You've had the doors are open. You pushed them open, whatever. You went to seminary. You got the training and all that. But the thing that I really like about you is you're a guy that seems to have a real good mind on your head. I mean, just like your thought process is good. Mm-hmm. You seem to be, you don't get too uptight over anything like that. How would you encourage some pastors out there that haven't had the formal education, the formal training? Mm-hmm. How would you encourage them, into what to do in their life, Because the reason I started this podcast, I've been to a lot of conferences where I've seen a lot of guys come and they don't have it. And you'll always know it's because they'll say, they got a question. They'll say, I've never had any education. I couldn't go to seminary, but I'm here and I feel like I'm not, making the grade. And the guy, whoever's putting on the conference, tries to encourage them and stuff. But I want you to do it because a lot of guys that are like me, like Harold Smith,
Right.
And so, man, I just want you to try to, give him some advice, counsel, encouragement,
Yeah, look, formal education is a part of my life, I really appreciate what it's done in my life. I teach, and I do all kinds of stuff like that. So, but it's not. I think ministry. One of the things that we forget, like ministry, churches, pastors, it's not one size fits all. Look, we talk about Harold a lot. That's kind of our common connection, but Harold will tell you he's in that vein and he didn't have formal training, and we would both say he the way he handles things and understands the scriptures is very unique and powerful, right? Your situation is your situation. There's a difference between not having formal education and not educating yourself.
Right.
I'll encourage you with this story. I had an ancestor. His name was Regulus Rayleigh. Matter of fact, straight across from us here, there's a book I've got that a cousin of mine put together about him. Regulus Rayleigh was born, and he was a young, I guess you would say like a preteen when the Civil War started up in North Arkansas.
Wow.
And he was too young to go to war until the end. He kind of got involved in what they call Southerners bushwhackers. He got into some of that, I think. But he was on the family farm, and he had come back from the war. He didn't get any education. Probably wouldn't have got a lot to start with in that setting, but they didn't even get what was available because of the war. I mean, there wasn't any schooling really happening outside of the home at all at that time.
Right.
And so he came back and was running the farm and was making a really good living, was known to be a successful farmer and all those things. And he went to a church, a revival meeting, I believe, and he came to Christ, and very soon thereafter felt a call to ministry. And that guy couldn't read. He'd go and preach, but he couldn't read.
That would definitely be uneducated.
Yeah. And so what he would do, the stories that they tell about him was that his wife could read, and she would read him the Bible, and he would memorize it from her reading.
Wow.
And then he would preach. Now, as that started, he taught himself to read. I'm sure his wife helped him.
Yeah.
And later in his life, he was known to be a guy that was really well studied. Right? I mean, whatever books he could get, whatever things he could get, he did. He studied for himself. But he was definitely began uneducated and untrained, but he took advantage of whatever opportunities he had, and he educated himself. I think it doesn't matter where you get the training from. It can be in a formal setting. It can be in a church that's really good at discipleship and bringing guys that are coming into ministry along. Or if you're in a situation where maybe that's not even part. A lot of churches don't do that well.
Right.
Well, you feel called to ministry. Well, guess what? You're going to have to study. You need to sit down. You need to take advantage. We have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the access we have in the modern day to solid biblical teaching. And so you can study. Obviously, reading your Bible, studying your Bible. I'm not saying you got to do the courses, but there's free courses. There's all kinds of stuff you can take advantage of. So whatever that looks like for you, don't think, well, this is just who I am. I'm this guy, and I've got to live in this little bit of knowledge that I have going into this thing. No, we all grow. We all learn. It takes different paths for people. So I would just encourage you, don't put yourself down. I always kind of poke at Ronnie and Harold, like, you guys, you don't need to talk about yourselves like that, right? I mean, you are educated. You're just educated differently in a different format, in a different setting.
Yeah. I mean, and really that right there is, my background was coming out of the Church of the Firstborn. And the thing was, even though I was very limited on my resources, partly because we didn't have it like today, it was that long ago, but partly, we were taught to kind of almost be afraid of that stuff. But what little bit I did have, it made me think, and you have to question things. Like, I was in a place where it's like, why do we believe this?
Right.
And you have to start digging deep, but and through that, you may not look at it like, you're being educated or whatever, but everything you take in is teaching you. You're learning, and you want to put that into practice. So, I'm always trying to just encourage guys. And you're not the only guy that gets on to me for saying that stuff too. But I've got other friends that they get on to me, but I, sometimes if there's ever a time that I might be intimidated a little bit, it's like when I'm in a room full of guys that have degrees everywhere, and it always goes pretty good. But that's probably the one little moment where I kind of feel that, So
it's what you do with the education you've got. I know a lot of guys with PhDs that are knuckleheads. A lot of them.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, man, you learn stuff, but you don't know what you're doing with it. Matter of fact, I spoke the other day. I volunteered with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and sometimes I get a chance to speak to some of the sports teams. And so I went, and we kind of do a word for the week with one of the teams I talked to, and our word was wisdom, right? And so I kind of started out with them saying, hey, man, what's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? And they didn't really have an answer. And so this is the illustration I always use. Knowledge, I asked him, I said, technically a tomato is a what? What is it, Ronnie? Technically,
they call it a fruit.
Technically, a tomato is a fruit. Yeah. That's knowledge. You have that piece of information. That's knowledge.
Yeah.
What's wisdom? Wisdom is being able to take that knowledge and use it properly. Well, guess what you shouldn't do? Don't put tomatoes in your fruit salad.
There you go.
Right? There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. So you can have all of the facts, all of the information, but if you aren't discerning through the power of the Holy Spirit, through the checking against the Scriptures, you're not applying that knowledge that you have well, then it's useless.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of guys, some of the most wise men I've ever known. Maybe they didn't have formalized education, but man, there is faithful church members in churches I've pastored that knew more about the Bible than I ever dreamed about. How did they come to that? They read the Bible hard all the time. They studied the Bible. They sat under good teaching. Maybe they read some books. And they had a depth of knowledge because they gave themselves to the Word of God. And that's what it amounts to.
Right. Yeah, and like I've always said this, like I don't ever want to be the guy that sounds like I am opposed to, formal education and training. I just didn't get the opportunity. The church I was in actually taught against that stuff. I mean, obviously, if you think you're the only church, you don't think you can go to these seminaries. But it was taught hard against. So, but the thing of it is, like when you went to seminary, man, you're just like drinking from a fire hydrant, and it's just a lot of teaching and knowledge, and then it's like, what are you going to do with that, you know? And that's where the wisdom comes in. Knowledge is knowing it. Wisdom is how to put it, into action. How many? I mean, I guarantee you know a lot of guys, like you said, that have a ton of knowledge, head knowledge. They know things. They don't have the ability to put it out there.
Right.
So yeah, no, I mean, and it's like this. If you would kind of share some. I mean, you got these degrees. Russell is involved in a lot of stuff. I come out here this week. I've kind of hung out with him a few days, and it's like, man, just tell him some of the stuff you're involved in. Like the biblical counseling and abolish abortion and all that different stuff.
Yeah, I've been involved in a lot of stuff. So obviously, I pastor the church here at West Park. That's my primary responsibility. It's the thing that takes precedence. Up until recently, I had been part-time working as a chaplain at Mercy Hospital down the road in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I'm wrapping that up. It's pretty well wrapped up, but technically, I guess through maybe this weekend is my last days with them. And then I also teach online at some schools. So I teach biblical counseling at Forge Theological Seminary. I teach several different courses, but they're all kind of in the biblical counseling realm, which is kind of my background. I'm trained in biblical counseling. I do a lot of it. I do some online. I do that through a big church in Florida that has a big biblical counseling ministry. Oh, wow. I do some contract counseling for them. I do it locally as well. So I've got some certifications and stuff in that arena. I also teach for a group called Nations University, which is a Bible college and seminary that they'll educate anybody, but it's kind of aimed at the third world, and it's really low cost for people in third world countries. Tuition free. There's some fees and things like that, but it's very inexpensive. So I teach right now there. I'm teaching 2 courses. It's basically an intro to Old Testament, and then another course, the Bible and Spirit. I think it's called the Bible and Spirituality is what it's called. And then recently just started working with a small seminary out of Virginia called Cornerstone College and Seminary. Great school. They've got a lot of great programs, and I'm teaching like a Greek. It's called exegesis and language tools. I'm not a language scholar, but that course is basically trying to help people utilize the tools that are available, things that we all have access to, like Blue Letter Bible and things like that. Yeah. How do you use that to really get at the root of some biblical language stuff when you need that?
Right.
You know, and so I do that, and I have been somewhat involved in the past in the abortion abolition movement. I'm still very passionate about that. I believe in that absolute abolition of abortion. I've tried to work towards that in our state. We've had some legislation that didn't get passed and some things like that, but I've been involved with a group called Arkansas Life and Liberty. Until recently, I was the president of the board there. I'm not anymore, but that's a great organization. They're trying to do good work in that arena. And so, like I said, I do that. I work with the FCA here locally, get to go to the schools and talk to some of the sports teams, try to bring some truth into that arena. So it sounds like a lot, but a lot of it's kind of here and there and touch and go, and it fits into the schedule in the ways that it does. But those are kind of the main components of my kind of ministry. I guess the different kinds of ministry that I'm connected to right now.
Yeah, see, I look at that, and in the book of 2 Timothy, Paul says, preach the word, he says, do the work of an evangelist, Now, I'm not going to say that's what probably me or you would look at like Paul's journeys. Right. But what you're doing is you're pastoring his church. You said that is the preeminent thing that you do, and I agree with that. But yet, you're reaching out in the schools, you're involved in counseling and teaching and, doing all these different things with the abortion, abolish abortion stuff. And the point that I love about that is you're all about the work of the Lord, but you're doing it all out of the context of the local church, And so I mean, even just that thought right there, I'd like for you to share with some of the guys that are listening, just on the importance of the local church and how that works with, like, none of your things that you do are a parachurch type thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a convicted Baptist, okay, and and one of the things, so I have a Southern Baptist background, and up until 3 years ago, that was my connection. Southern Baptists have a very strong theology of the local church. I think at times, the higher you move up kind of the food chain in the SBC, they kind of lose sight of the authority of the local church a little bit. And I can talk about them because I was one all my life. Okay, so I've been involved in a lot of that stuff. I was involved with the Arkansas Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptist Convention. So I've now, in the last 3 years, been a part of a different group of churches, the BMA, Baptist Missionary Association of America. I've really grown in my theology and understanding of the local church a little bit in that, because they have such a strong emphasis on it. And so when I think about the local church, I truly believe in the authority of the local church to do the work of the Lord. And I don't know how to say this. I don't want to speak in an absolute way, but I am very skeptical of any kind of ministry that is claiming to do the work of the Lord, that is not doing it in some way, shape, form, or fashion without the oversight of the local church. And I know there's some exceptions where that's probably not feasible, but by and large, whether you're a missionary, whether it's the counseling stuff that I do, whether it's whatever the case may be, I know like when you get into schools and education, like, you know, some of those are connected to a local church, or maybe they started that way because of different things they got, you know, but maybe that there is like Central Baptist College is the BMA's college in Arkansas. It is under the authority. It is owned and operated by the BMA of Arkansas, and the churches have the authority to vote and to wield authority over that institution. And so I think the power of the local church is imminent. And so if you're going to do something, some guys just say, "Well, I'm going to go do this." Well, why don't you want that to have the oversight and protection of the local church? Why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want your pastors or elders or whatever the makeup of your church is, your church and its congregational authority, to be able to hold you accountable? Brother Harold Smith, again, just to use him as an example. Brother Harold Smith is a missionary. He does a lot of things. You guys have heard about him. I know a lot of you that follow this. He does works with churches that are struggling. He was the interim pastor of the church here at West Park before I came here. He does that. He has the bookstore where he has outreach. A lot of different things. He travels and preaches. But Brother Harold is a missionary under the authority of West Park Baptist Church. And he believes in this too. If we saw some sort of aberrant doctrine, we are duty bound to what we believe, to call him to account. That's our job. And so when you get out here and there's people not without that oversight, or people that are, at least if there's Christians in these organizations, sometimes we were talking about this earlier, there's people that do certain kinds of ministry and they say, "I'm doing the Lord's work," but they're not even personally connected to a local church. Right. And if you're not personally connected to a local church, I don't want anything to do with the ministry you've got going on. I just don't. And you say, "Well, that's kind of a harsh statement." What's true? If you're not connected to the body of Christ and you're not under the authority of any type of church or pastors or elders or anything like that, you're out there on your own. You're a lone wolf Christian, and it's hard for me to trust you because you don't have any accountability in your life.
So let me ask you this. What would you say to a guy that, let's say he's out there trying to do some ministry, let's say he's in a church that it's not that he may not want to be under that authority, but the church really doesn't care. I mean, it's just like, whatever, thumbs up to you, but they're really not being really biblical in what they're doing.
Right.
Because I've thought, and the reason I'm asking, I'm not setting you up. I mean, I've thought, because I know people that have been in churches like that, and so what would you say to somebody like that? Well, I'm actually just asking you so I learn.
Personally, I would say, you might want to assess what's going on at that church.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously.
Exactly.
That's the first answer. What's going on there? Why isn't there any interest in providing some sort of, at least to assess what that person's doing and have some sort of, like, "Hey, have you thought of what's going on here? Hey, why are you doing this?" If they're connected to the local church and they're willing to submit, if the church was to ever say, "Hey, what's this about? Why are you doing this? Why are you saying this?" Hey, that's not congruent with our doctrine at all. It's a middle ground there, right? It's at one of those gray areas, but I think initially it's not that look, your church doesn't have to be passionate about what you're passionate about. And I think that's one of the things we get in. Some of these folks that I've fellowshiped with, they say, well, my church doesn't care about this, and that's on my heart, and I'm doing this, and they don't want to. It's like, well, your church doesn't have to come along for every ride, but they should be able to exercise some authority. If there's a complete disconnect, you don't need to go hunting a church that just wants what you want, wants to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
But if there's no oversight at all, I mean, we have oversight in charge of all of our members, whether they're involved in active ministry or not. If there is none of that pastoral love and care and support that's going on, again, your pastor doesn't have to get involved in it. If your pastor doesn't want to go do this, he doesn't feel led to do that, or he doesn't have the ability to do that, fine. But hopefully, there is some sort of connection there where at least you can talk to them and you can find some sort of common ground. But I know there's a lot of people that I'm passionate about jail ministry, but my church doesn't want anything to do with it. Okay, from my church perspective, I would say, hey, we'll buy you Bibles, we'll encourage you, we want you to do it. Hey, if I have an opportunity, maybe I'll go with you, but hey, you do that, and we want to empower you for the work of ministry. But a lot of guys aren't getting that, and I understand it.
That's a great point. And I'd like to say this to the pastors that will be listening. There's an idea sometimes that the pastor has to be leading everything that goes on in the church. Now, I'm not talking about inside here, but I'm talking about what we are talking about. Like, oftentimes, you'll hear things like this, like, well, we're not doing anything over here. And I'll say, why don't you quit saying we and just say, I'm not doing anything. If it's on your heart, go do it. I'll support you. I'll try to help you. But as a pastor, you can't lead everything that goes on. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's going to be things that people may be, well, it's like this. Harold does what Harold does. Right. You can't be there, leading that or like present with him all the time. I got a friend in Oklahoma City, Brady Brewer, and he's pastoring a church now, but for years he felt called to go to the streets and evangelize. And, he would share that with his church. He'd say, I go out and I'll do this and, go to Bricktown in Oklahoma City or the bus station. And he would say, if anybody wants to go, just let me know. But he never took the approach of like, nobody's helping, nobody does this. You got to understand something. When church members, and I pray that they get convictions to want to go do things like, reach out to the homeless or go to the nursing home. But that doesn't mean the whole church moves in that same, right, on your leading,
That's right.
And so pastors just need to know that, like, look, brothers, you're called to do certain things. Just like you said, my primary thing is to pastor this church. Yeah. If all these other things started to overlap that, right, you'd have to say, okay, something's got to go here. As much as it might be a good work, right? But, so
yeah, I think empowering your people, right? I had somebody call me the other day, called me the other day and said, Pastor, we had seen a couple of young people that had come to Christ, and said, hey, that one of those young people that came to Christ, they live in the neighborhood, my neighborhood, and I've got a granddaughter that age. Would it be okay if I tried to just get them together and once in a while and just maybe try to kind of teach them how to study the Bible? I was like, yeah, go ahead and do that. And if you need Bibles, we'll get them for you. Yeah, and if you need some resources, we'll get them for you. But please do that. And kind of in my heart, I'm like, you didn't have to ask me that. Go ahead, But I'm glad she was saying, hey, I was just kind of wondering if that would be something I could do. I said, please do. I know this person. I know where they're at. I'm not scared of what they're going to be doing. And, sometimes we need to check in. Hey, how's that going? Check in on them. But I just want to empower them to do what God's leading them to do. Understanding I don't have to go every time you meet.
I like these things you're saying. It's stirring up my mind because I do think some pastors, I think they battle with, like, they're the pastor. And there's a certain expectation a lot of times that they're to do all this stuff. They know they can't, but then when something like that happens, I think some pastors feel like, oh, I better be the one, teaching in the Bible, and you'll just stretch yourself so thin, you'll die. And so, I just like to encourage pastors to say, look, when you've got people in your church that say, hey, you think this would be good for me to do, just like what you described, Man, I love it. I love to see the church because that's the way a body really functions together. I mean, every member doing the part that they've been called to do and working it effectually. I mean, man, that is the greatest thing, you know. So a pastor shouldn't feel, you know, on one hand, it's like I can't do everything, but then when somebody else is leading and teaching, don't feel threatened.
Right.
Man, rejoice in that. You know, your church is living and it's, you know, it's doing those things, you know.
And that's how your ministry really reaches, right?
Amen.
You know, you're pouring into these people in different ways, whether it's through your preaching, maybe there's other situations in which you're doing that. And well, all of a sudden you're personally in a real way touching a situation that honestly doesn't fit in your schedule. Maybe you're bivocational, maybe you're working a full-time job and that's all you can do to preach and care for the sick and to check on your church members. I'd really like to do X, Y, and Z, but I can't do it. You know, I don't have the ability to do it because of my time and my situation, my family stuff I've got to care for.
Yeah,
all that stuff. Well, all of a sudden I'm pouring into these people and they're pouring into other people. There's a real good English word for that. It's multiplication. It's that effort is multiplied, and it's not because if you're trying to do everything and have a finger, you know, kind of hold everything under your thumb, it limits what the ministry of the church can be.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And that's why, you know, and part of a pastor's job is to teach, it's to train, it's to equip. You know, you know, now I know we know that God is the one, you know, the Holy Spirit's working that, but God put teachers, pastors in the church for that purpose right there. Right. And so you have to fulfill what you're doing, you know, and you know, it kind of goes back to a lot of your education is going to come through your trial of faith in these things, you know, just experience. You'll go to things. Hey, I do this for me, man. Tell me, share if you got some good stuff. Share with people, you know, me and everybody else, some of the things you went through as a young pastor, mistakes you made. If you made any, you may not have made any.
I'm sure I've made
share with some people like some mistakes you made that if you could go back, say I wouldn't want to do that. Now we know it all worked out for God's good, you know, but.
Yeah, I would say, you know, the thing that's most poignant in my mind, and look, there's going to be a lot of opinions on some of these things, but, you know, I remember when I was really convicted about the way a church ought to handle things like church discipline, and I had the mistake for a long time of, well, you know, that's a little muddy, you know, I don't know, I don't really want to do that much, and the church hasn't ever really done that, but it's like, no, there's certain things we got to handle.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of rightly understood church discipline happens in private meetings, you know, biblically speaking, and things are corrected, and it doesn't go any further than that. I think we forget that. But when it came to some more extreme situations, there were times where I felt like we've got to handle it now. It wasn't very patient to try to confront the problem, to give that person in the Spirit of God time to work, to leave that space there. And it's just like, oh, you don't hear this? Okay, next step, Matthew 18. Let me look it up. Number 2, let's go. Let me get somebody else. We're coming to see you tomorrow. You know, to try to, I think maybe in general the idea is patience, man. I'm not saying that some of the things I did weren't right in principle, but in methodology, there wasn't a lot of wisdom in the way that those things were practiced, where I was just like, man, I hit the gas on that, and I should have hit the brakes. You know, I should have had some patience. I should have let the Spirit of God have some time to work. Ultimately, that can't be a cop-out. Hey, I'm letting the Spirit of God do the work, so I'm never going to touch this thing. I'm never going to deal with this situation, whatever it may be. But if you don't give any time, and you just hit somebody in the face with something, and you're confronting a sin or a situation, and we're humans, man. We kind of bow up and say, "Wait, who do you think you're talking to?" You know,
exactly.
And I don't have time. I don't have the wisdom to say, "Hey, let's slow this down." I think probably that aspect of patience, whether it's changing things in a church, trying to move a church a certain direction, I didn't always have a lot of patience there. I didn't have enough wisdom sometimes early on to say, "This is going to take a little bit of time." I don't have to get all tore up inside. I don't have to worry so much. I don't have to stress so much because God's working. There's progress, you know, those kind of things.
This kind of goes back to the knowledge and wisdom thing.
Right.
You have the knowledge. You even have the Word telling you this stuff, but not much wisdom at that time. And let me ask you this, because I know when I was younger, sometimes this is what probably caused me to do some of those unwise things. There's a sense of the people that the people that taught you, the mentors, the people that discipled you, and have you ever felt that pressure of like, well, what would they think about how am I doing this job, and and you're almost feeling like you're being forced. That's what I always felt. It was like nobody was really there, but I had this pressure of like, what would people think about how I'm handling this, And the best I can tell people is this: those folks ain't there. This is you dealing with these people. And I love what you said about having the patience to wait. And sometimes I almost felt like it's a cop out, but it wasn't really my wisdom. It was probably more God's grace. But I did wait, and then when God works things out, it's like, man, that is so much better, Right. But I've messed things up too.
Yeah, I think that pressure, it really comes down to, who you trying to please. I know we talk about that a lot in preaching and teaching, but if I'm worried about my mentors, or I'm worried about the guys in my circle, right? We talk about our circle sometimes, Ronnie and me and some of these guys. These are kind of the circle of guys that I communicate with regularly, and we do things together, and we have some trust for one another and all those things. That's great. But if I'm doing something and all I can think about is, oh gosh, what's Harold Smith going to say about this? What's Ronnie Qualls going to do when he finds out about me doing this? And I'm going to have to hear this, and they're going to say that, but they're not there, and they're not with you in prayer, and they're not with you with those people. And so who am I trying to please? Am I trying to please God and care for my people? Or am I trying to, build up my resume where I'm the guy that does this? That guy, that guy right there, he don't take no junk. He's the one that he's handling that mess. And it's like, no, there is a time to let God be the one that directs all of those things. And I think if we're seeking to please God, then that'll take care of itself.
Yeah, like one thing you just said in there, you talking about what would Harold think, or me, or whoever, and we have the privilege, we get the opportunity, we can call one another and say, hey, have you ever dealt with something like this?
Sure.
But and like if you called me and I said, well, I had a situation like that, and this is what I did. Well, that was my church. That was a certain person. And even though, it kind of lines up like it looks like the same thing, you're not me. That person ain't the person I dealt with. Exactly. You're in a whole different thing. So I can give advice or counsel, or I could say, this is what I did. But I always end that stuff with, but man, what you're dealing with, even though it's kind of the same, it's going to be different. Mm-hmm. And I just say, man, you do what you feel like, the Lord wants you to do, because, I'm not the end all of that. And so I don't know. It just, I did something, I won't say what it is on here. I mean, and I can tell you after this, but it had to do with inviting somebody to, come to something. And I got counsel from guys saying, I probably would go this way or whatever. Well, I did just the opposite. But at the end of the day, I was the one that had to make the decision. And as I was praying about it, I just felt that the Spirit of God was saying, you need to do this. And hey, all I can tell you is it worked out good, So, but I had people say, well, what if it doesn't go good? I said, well, let's chalk that up as experience. I probably won't do that again. So, not the end of the world there, but excuse me. But no, so you got any? That's the only mistake you ever made?
No, there's a lot. I'm just trying to think how to express some of these things, man. I mean, there's been so many things. I think for me, there was a time when I was. I think for me, one of the big things was like I was a preacher. That was kind of what I gave my time to in the beginning. I'm going to study. I'm going to preach well. I think one of the mistakes that I made this covers a lot of mistakes, is I kind of had the belief if I preached it and I taught on it, they ought to understand it and do it. And if they didn't, then they were wrong, and they needed to be chastised or something. Mm-hmm. And again, that's another thing with like patience. And you start thinking about that in the right context. It's like, how many times has God told you something? How many times have you read something in the Bible and you still didn't do it? And How many times, have you told your children something and over and over and over and over again? A lot of times I think I would say, this is the issue we're dealing with. This is the biblical teaching on it. I've taught you this. And so what's your problem? Why won't you go with me this way? Why won't, and then there's the practical stuff. We always used to joke about when you're out doing some of the things you never think you're going to have to do, when you're a pastor. And I've been to school and I'm going here. And I remember one time I was with a pastor when I was serving as a youth minister, and I was out there and we were striping. They had like a tar and chip parking lot.
Yeah.
And, so we were putting stripes on it for parking spots. He looks over and he said, "What class did you learn to do this in seminary?" That was kind of the joke.
Yeah.
And, I hope I've never had the mindset that I wouldn't do certain things because I'm the pastor or I'm this guy. But I think that's an easy attitude to fall into too. It's like, I'm the pastor, I deal with this stuff. It's like, no, it's not that you have to do everything, but I'm willing to do everything. There's nothing in the church that I'm too good to do, and don't do it. The old saying is don't ask anybody to do something you wouldn't do or haven't done. And not that you've done everything, but if you wouldn't give it a go and do that, why would you ask this person to do it? Now, they may be better equipped. They may be the right person to do that, but if you're giving them a job and you say, because I don't want to do it, I think that's one of the things. Sometimes, we talk about delegation, you don't do too much, but some of that comes from on the bad end of, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be involved in that. I don't want to deal with those kinds of people, right? And so it's like, oh yeah, you go ahead and you go do that. And so I think there's a line there between I'm trying to do everything, and then over here I'm trying to avoid stuff.
Yeah, I think there's the day that we live in some ways, at least probably some of the circles we kind of run in, there's been an elevation of, great preachers and stuff, and there's an idea of what people might think that is. They might say, "Hey, I want to be a pastor." Well, a lot of being a pastor is doing striping parking lots, or like you have all these degrees, but yet, it would be easy for you to go, "I didn't go to school for all this," it's like, a lot, but at the same time, I've always told people this: when you get up and preach, now you're going to preach one sermon on Sunday morning. You don't have the multi-services,
Yeah.
And here's the thing: your sermon, it needs to be able to feed the guy that knows the most, but it's got to reach down to the most most immature Christian you have. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but just like the youngest, that hasn't grown much. And you got this one message, and you could look at a passage, you could go, "Well, I know way more than I could be bringing out the Greek and all this," but that's not what's needed,
right.
And so I guess what I'm trying to get across is that much of pastoring is just it's just loving on people. It's just meeting them where they're at and dealing with them. And because the truth of the matter is, we've all been there.
Yeah. That's right.
I mean, when you felt like God was going to kill you, if you didn't tell everybody you was called to ministry, I mean, it probably wasn't true, but you definitely felt like it. That pastor wasn't going to correct you on the spot. But no, something I was going to ask you about ministry. What in the world was it, man? I'm getting old now. But
I'm catching up.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one that's right there. You probably started pastoring about 24, 23?
No, so
how old are you now?
I turned 40. So
okay.
Let me think about that.
26.
How old was I? Yeah, something like that. I guess I was a youth minister when I was about that age.
Okay.
I think when I went to First Baptist Meeting, I'd been pastoring a couple of years. I think I was right at 30 when I went there, and then I was when I came here, I was 37. So
okay, let me ask you. This is one I always ask people. When you felt called to ministry, obviously, I don't think you probably had talked to your wife about it prior to.
No, I hadn't. That's the crazy thing.
Because I'm real big on this one. Your wife really needs to be on board.
Sure.
And so talk a little bit about that. How did Sarah How did she take this when you come and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
I got some news for you"?
Yeah, well, I mean, she was there,
Oh,
and,
she was there.
Yeah,
in that class. Okay,
she
all
was
right.
there. Yeah, man.
So she's just a surprise to everybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was like trying to do that whole write on the paper and kind of try to tell her what's going on, and so I was trying to relay it to her in some way, but I don't think
This
she
is about to happen.
Yeah, so I don't think she really got it, but I don't think it came as a complete surprise because there was such an acceleration, right, from the time I'd gotten back from that army situation and getting involved in the life of the church, and just things began progressing really quickly there.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, okay, you're doing this, and you're involved in that, and it was just moving very fast in that direction. And look, I don't advise anybody do things the way I did them, right? I mean, it was not, it wasn't well mapped, right? It was so but she was on board, to my wife's credit, she's always been willing to go along for the ride. And look, at the risk of being sexist, there's never been a time when we've made a transition in ministry where my wife's initial reaction was immediately, all right, yeah, let's go. Okay? It's just not her bent, right? It didn't matter if things were good, things were bad, things were tough, we didn't have any money, we did, whatever. It didn't matter what was going on. She had made a home. She had, figured out how to live life just like we all do. And the initial reaction always like, wait just a second, hold on, what's going on? But it didn't take very long for her to also, I was willing to entertain things sometimes. Maybe you shouldn't always be able to, but I was willing to say, okay, I'll talk to these guys about that. I'll talk to them. I don't want to, I'm not going to just immediately say no to something if there was an opportunity there in those moments. Now I have maybe a little more maturity. I don't know. There's probably some immaturity there that's kind of like, it's kind of nice to be courted. People kind of want you, people want to, there's a little arrogance there.
Yeah, it probably makes you feel kind of good.
Yeah, and so, but I would entertain the conversation and she would just say, quit, I don't want to talk about it, But like the places where we actually were talking about coming somewhere, we came up here to West Park. We met with Brother Harold before we talked to the church. We just kind of drove around. Same kind of thing happened at Mina, and it was like, she just like at some point kind of says, yeah, we're going to come up here, aren't we? It's like, yeah, I think so. So it was, there was never strong resistance. She's always, but she is that check in me, which I guess occasionally you got to be careful. Sometimes you can be restless and you just want to, hey, what's over there?
Yeah.
So God's used her in my life to, hey, pump the brakes just a second. Let's look at this a little bit. Let's take some time. Not that I wasn't praying about things or considering things, but sometimes you don't consider, like, that's not, there was a time when my kids were young, they didn't know we're going to move, whatever. They're a little bitty. Not a big deal. Well, this last move, my kids were middle, my son's 15, so they were like 12 and 11, and so they were a little bit older. That's a harder transition.
It is.
The older they get, the harder that gets. And so I think your wife is, obviously she's got to be on board, but you also have to hear from her. And I think we got to be careful with this whole, what is it? I'm the leader of the household. Yeah, sure. But the right understanding of that is that I'm going to hear from my wife. I'm going to hear from what she feels like, what she believes, what God's saying to her. And then I'm going to consider that. At some point, yeah, the decision has to be made. But if I'm just making it and I'm not even considering those things, then I'm definitely the one that's in the wrong. My wife has been a great pastor's wife. She's very humble. She's very quiet. She serves in a lot of different ways. At our church here, she teaches one of the little kids' Sunday school classes, and she helps out in the nursery and does different things. She's done a lot of stuff in the past. She's very musical. She's played music at our churches in the past in different times, and so she's been very good in that role. She's not been somebody that wants or needs a spotlight, but she's always there. She's always serving. She's always connected. She's always willing to be hospitable.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
Yeah, a lot of that I can relate to. I didn't handle things right. My wife is definitely a person that once she's in a place, she doesn't want to move, I've always found this, generally speaking, I'm not saying this is individually, but generally speaking, men are more about facts and, about what I need to do, and we'll just go do it. Even if it's cutting off friends that, are heretics now or whatever, But women are more, about a home, security, relationships, things like that. And their idea of moving and stuff, it doesn't appeal to them as much. So like every time we ever moved, we moved to Montana. My wife was, it's almost like, having to be drugged a little bit. Once we got there, she loved it. She didn't want to move back. So we went through the same thing coming back. And then when we moved to over to Bowlegs, where we were at Sovereign Grace in Ada, we were in a good church. A couple of their Justin and Misty Wright, we had all left the Church of the Firstborn at the same time. And so for 20-something years, we were just running together all the time. So you got your closest friends. He's now an elder with me over there. There was 4 of us. And man, all of a sudden I'm feeling like God is opening doors. I'm not trying to go. I never put a resume in or anything. And I can see this, and there's a part of me that thinks, I know she can see this too, but she's not going to admit it, But she did not want to leave the church there, and now we've done it, and my wife, she's such a tremendous help to me. And the truth of the matter is, I didn't do things right. I didn't consider her as well. And here's probably where some of our problem was. She's like, you're the type that's going to jump in and figure out how to swim later. I'm like, you're going to take 10 years of swimming lessons before you go wading, So we're about at, opposite ends of the spectrum on that stuff. But in all honesty, though, if a guy is feeling called to ministry, there is a certain criteria that his wife needs to be on board with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because and we can go into this too, because you're at a stage, you talked about, your kids were being born, like first time around, and moving over here to 12 and on down, stepping down somewhat. As a pastor, sometimes our kids are expected to be perfect,
Right.
Man. Now my 3 grown children, my girls were pretty close to that. Now my son, he was a pretty good kid, but he caused more problems than them 2 combined, But then we get these 2 we've adopted, and oh, holy smoke now. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm not even sure I qualify as a pastor anymore. So, but now talk about that a little bit, just, because I know, here's why I say this, this is why I'm asking you. I know there's guys that will be listening that struggle with this, whether it's in their marriage, how to, to connect with their wife in that, or, raising children at the same time.
Yeah, it's not easy. I'll have to say probably way more to my wife's credit than my own. My sons, as much as knuckleheads as they are, and as boys are going to be, they're good boys. They they behave well for the vast majority of the time, but they're still little boys, bigger boys now. They're somewhat big as I am, but
William Paul, he's a big boy.
Yeah,
Man.
he's a big boy, and so that's you've got to wrestle with that. And look, we've talked about this a lot. I was actually on another podcast this morning talking about this. My oldest son is autistic, and that's a whole nother set of stuff, right? And and I know you have experience with that as well.
Yeah,
So you have to say, like, how do I pastor and raise my family, but also pastor my family both as their father, husband, and as their pastor? It's like, well, okay, that's a strange dynamic. I got a special needs kid. How do I handle that dynamic, and how do I wrestle that out? If your kids, if you can't look, I think the Bible's pretty clear. If your kids are completely outside the faith, they're completely uncontrollable, they're completely, there's no sense in which you have control of your household. I think the scripture's clear. I don't think you're well qualified. It doesn't mean you can't be qualified, but it means it begins in your home. If your wife is in a situation where she's not humble in spirit, she's not doing, gosh, I can't. My brain's a little fried today. We're in the middle of this revival, so I'm a little fried. But if your wife is prone to be somebody that's causing conflict and talking a lot about people and doing those kinds of things, well, guess what? you're not going to have a good situation in ministry. I've known more than one pastor who was an excellent pastor, an excellent preacher, all of those things. But everywhere he went, his wife caused him problems. And
it's tragedy.
That's his fault as much as it is hers. He should have either took a step back and sat under good teaching and sought to work through those things, or just recognize that's not the season I'm in. That would be hard. If all of a sudden my kids or my wife just got into foolishness of the highest degree and it wasn't being corrected and they weren't being repentant, I hope I'd have the humility to say, I got to consider this. Now, most of us, maybe we don't. Maybe we can make good excuses when it's us. But your wife has got to be prepared for it. You've got to be prepared for it. And you've got to be prepared to, look, I'm not talking about somebody you grow up, you've raised your kids the right way, and then they depart therefrom. I may have a different opinion on that than somebody. It's very clear where they, as adults, made that decision. But when they're under your authority,
right,
and you're not controlling, you're not making an effort to handle that, you've got to start considering. I'm not talking about every little thing or even one big situation, but if the pattern is not being corrected and you're not trying to deal with it and you're excusing it, then you're looking at what I would say not being well qualified.
Yeah, and that's a tough one, because to come to the realization, like, I may have to step down for a while and get my house in order,
right?
Because this is a pretty tough statement, but like you said, you might be a faithful pastor, a great preacher, all these things, but if your household is being neglected or they're out of order or whatever, the thing that's most important that God gave you, you're not doing it there. Right. And I mean, the scripture's clear. If you're not doing it in your own home, you shouldn't be doing it in the house of God.
That's right.
Now, I'm saying that, and I'm kind of beating myself up, just sometimes dealing with kids, like you talking about. I have my oldest of the two that we have at home. He's autistic, and for the life of me, man, it's been tough. And I don't know if I can say this, but I'm looking forward to your book coming out and all that. So, just trying to get some insight on how to deal with things better and things like that. But no, man, I mean, there's so much to pastoring that I think a lot of times guys get into it and they're looking at just what we call the glory stuff, preaching the great sermons, getting invited to a conference or writing books or whatever. And maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. Right. Jeremy Williams, he's going to be preaching here Wednesday night. One of the things I love about Jeremy is perfectly content. If nobody ever invited him anywhere, whatever, he's perfectly content right there in Houston Baptist Church, not big Houston, Texas, but Arkansas. He's perfectly content, and it's like he understands where God has called him and placed him. Now, I'm sorry to tell Jeremy, but we're probably going to keep inviting him to come preach at conferences and stuff. Yeah, he's a pretty good preacher. So, but the thing of it is, you have to know where you're called, but you have to understand that it's not just about preaching. It's not just these certain things. There's so much more involved in it. And all I can tell you is this: if you've been called to it, just like you said a while ago, it's hard work. It doesn't really end.
Right. It's
not probably the best paying stuff in the world, compared to other jobs. But here's the thing: if you've been called to it, you're called to it.
Right.
And I mean, even we might even complain at times, but you kind of come to and you go, but there isn't anything I'd rather be doing.
Right.
So. And that's kind of one of the things that I look at on that. So now look, we've been on here a little bit over an hour. It's 4:05, and I know you've got things to do. We're going to be eating at 5. One last thing, you are a certified biblical counselor. Mm-hmm. You not only know it, but you are licensed to train people and teach it. For pastors out there who may struggle in this, is there any couple little just things that you could give them, like when you're counseling, just always remember this? And I'm just trying to pick your brain.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I try to encourage guys with is for pastors. A lot of guys will tell me, I'm not a counselor. And here's what I tell them. Look, from a biblical counseling perspective, we're not psychologists. We don't believe in that. We don't believe in their systems. I ask them, well, do you believe in discipleship? Yeah, of course. Do you do discipleship? Well, yeah, we do discipleship. Have you ever discipled someone? Well, yeah, I've discipled someone. And here's what I tell them. Biblical counseling is simply discipleship with a laser focus. You take enough time to try to discern what the real issues are that are going on. You assess them biblically. You look and say, this is where you are. This is where God says you should be. And you don't just say, there's the Bible solution, talk to you later. You say, how do we practically help you walk like we would in any discipleship situation from where you are to where God says you should be? And it takes patience and it takes time and it takes study of the Word. It's, do we believe that the Word is sufficient?
Amen.
Peter says he's given us all things that we need for life and for godliness. I think the Scriptures are sufficient for the work of counseling. And I think all pastors that preach and teach and disciple, they have the skill set. They just need to take it from the pulpit and the discipleship, the general discipleship that they're involved in, and say, okay, how do I take that to a guy that's struggling with anger? Well, I just narrow it down and I use the same processes, the same thought. I'm studying out the Scriptures, I'm praying about it, and I'm walking with this man from where he is to where God would have him to be. And so you have the skill set. It's, are you willing to just dig just a little bit deeper and apply it to specific individuals and specific life situations?
Man, that's good. I really appreciate that. And I'll just say this with that. Sometimes I think people, they know a situation, it's a sticky situation. And sometimes I think pastors are afraid to just say what the Word of God says about this. Yeah. Like, how many times, and this is kind of getting more prominent today, people are living together. And then, you come in and you're like, and it's like, I think pastors are almost afraid to say, hey, you can't be doing that. Pastor, listen, you are the speaker for the Word of God. You're the mouthpiece of that. In the place that God has called you, don't be afraid of that, because you need to do it in love, right, and you care about them. But the only thing that's going to direct them the right direction is the Word of God. So don't ever be afraid to just say, this is what God's Word says, Yeah. That's what we've been given. So,
some situations are a lot more complicated. You don't know exactly what's going on. You really need to see, have some time talking to them, trying to understand what's happening, to find out what, biblical counseling we call hard issues or root issues. And when it gets down to it, a lot of what we deal with is, it's rooted in pride, it's rooted in anger, it's rooted in, just very broad spectrum stuff. It's like, well, okay, it's rooted in idolatry. I look at addiction from that perspective. All addiction really boils down to, it's idolatry. I'm choosing something over what God says is best, over what's best for my family, over what's best for my health, over what's, okay, well, if I'm like, well, I'm not an addiction specialist. Instead, if I say, well, what's God say about idolatry? I got a lot of places to look. There's a lot that God has to say.
Right.
And so if we're going after killing idols, that's something that a pastor is well equipped to do, and it's just being applied to that particular area of a person's life.
I like that discipleship with a laser focus, but I do like the fact you added in that it takes patience.
Sure.
And sometimes just counseling is just it's people having to listen to just the hard truth. And to be honest, I think most time people know.
Sure.
And but sometimes you just have to, just like your children, they know, but you have to say it, So, well, listen, I'm not going to keep him on here any longer. I'm loving this. When you're uneducated and untrained, it's good to have friends like Russell. And I guess it's kind of cheating to make him go to all the seminary and then glean all this stuff from him, but that's what I'm going to do. But Russell, I've enjoyed it. I've been hounding him for a little bit. We was going to do this when he came to my conference, and we just didn't really have the time. So we came out here and we just kind of had to make time, and I feel kind of bad because here in about 50 minutes, we're going to be eating tacos on Taco Tuesday.
That's right.
And then we're going to get to hear Randall Chronister preach.
That's right.
That's some good stuff.
Amen.
Yeah, Wes Brown preached some fire last night, and I figure it's going to be the same tonight. So,
Amen.
Anyway, Russell, thank you for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Until next time, this is the Uneducated, Untrained Pastor, and I'm Pastor Ron, and we'll see you next time.
All right.